Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunwerks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
All right, guys. I want to continue on this this pilot programming that we've put together on these first couple sessions of this podcast. And I've been getting my butt kicked on crosswind. And I get the process, but I'm still working on it. And just one of those things that you just got to do, and you got to practice, and you got to execute, and hope it just starts clicking, kind of like landings. So on crosswind landings with the plane, we've got a couple controls. We got aileron controls, which is kind of like your roll, and then you've got rudder controls in the back, which is your yaw. And you can think about it, when you have wind, you're trying to go down this way, and you got wind from the side, your plane, it sees both those winds combined, and it's exactly what happens when you're shooting a bullet. So your bullet noses into the wind. In this case, the plane's nosing into the wind as well. But you don't want to touch down with your plane nosing into the wind. It needs to be pointed down the runway. So we have to use a combination of those controls to point the plane down the runway and keep it on that line, because if you point it down the runway, all of a sudden that wind's going to deflect the trajectory. You're going to move off the center line. One of the cool things about the flying is you push this button, and if you're flying around an airport that's got a weather station, you push this button and it says, all right, you have a 260 wind at 10 knots, and you know what your runway heading is. You can do the quick math and come up with a value there, and that's kind of cool. It's like you don't have to get out your wind meter. You can overfly an airport. You can see your wind socks or your other indicators and get a feel for, that speed and direction also. So that's kind of cool. When we're shooting at the range, when we're shooting up on a mountain at big old bull elk, you don't get to call in a weather report or look at those wind flags. But we do have a few tools and secrets that we use to do that. It seems like I don't use a wind meter as much as I used to, but that's a great tool to have in your backpack. It gives you a number, like it's a legit real number, and it'll keep you from making a magnitude of error mistake for sure. The indicators we use downrange, like mirage and vegetation, can give us a really good feel for the direction of the wind. So there's a lot of tools that we have available to us to make that work. Let me describe just a little bit about those two processes on the airplane. So the one process, which is like, this is what a baller pilot does. Like this is what the 737 pilot does. And so one of my CFI instructors kind of felt like this was the right way to do it. And that was, you essentially just crab into the wind. So that is a rudder application. So you just nose the plane into the wind, and then you're going sideways down to the runway. And it's kind of a weird feeling because you're literally, not straight. And then at the last minute, when all the other stuff that you have to do to land nicely is going on, in the last minute, you apply rudder correction so that now your nose is pointing towards the center line and you're on center line. But the problem with that is now you're going to start drifting off center line. So at the same time that you do the rudder correction, now you have to dip one of your wings down into the wind. And so that offsets that motion, right? So you have to just roll right out of this crab into this tip. Oh man, there's a lot of stuff going on right there. Now, I aspire to be a great pilot, and I'm putting in the work to do it. And I'm not scared to go up there and fly when it's hard. Like, I like no wind days, but like, we'll go do pattern work when there's winds. And it's a little tense, but that's how you learn. I mean, that's how you get that experience. The easier way to do it, and so the last CFI that I worked with, worked with me to develop this process a little better. And that is, you're on short final, you bake that correction in by applying that rudder control and dropping your wing and stabilizing that, on the way down to the runway. And then you do all the normal inputs and operations to round out and flare and touch down. And I found that is a much simpler way to get control of it while I'm learning and developing the skill sets to, make the perfect landings. But I have practiced the other way. So I do understand both of them. And, in both of them, there's great documentation for how, what you do, when you do it, et cetera, et cetera. What I wanted to talk about today was the system of compensating for wind that I've developed, probably put this together well over 15 years ago in our first wind system that we did, and kind of how it's different than what a lot of other people teach, and maybe explain why we do it, and just take it from there. In today's current nomenclature, the way that we talk about things, the system that I want to talk about is base wind. So base wind is, let's call it basic wind. It's our basic wind system. The second system that we use is called vector wind, and it introduces a lot more complexities, and we call that an advanced correction method. So we get kind of a basic and advanced. I will tell you that for 95% of your hunting chances, opportunities, situations, the base wind method is the right method to use. It is perfect. And all of our electronic systems and work streams and all that we do are all kind of geared towards that base wind, vector wind. So every range finding product that I've made, even our old BR2, the first, badass rangefinder that we put out, that was in 2011. That had a base wind calculation, kind of the early version of it. The BR4 and the Revic range-finding binocular, BLR10B, those products have a base wind calculation built right in, so that when you push the button, you get your elevation correction, your shoot to range, whatever, but you also get that base wind solution right there, no button pressing. In the old BR2, we used to navigate, into the menu and see what that wind was, but in this new one, it's just there. So you program a base wind value with your profile. When you push the button, you get a base wind hold. So, okay, so here, let's just back up and talk about this from the beginning. The first thing that I want to emphasize is, if you are not training every day and shooting every day or every weekend, if it's not like what you live, eat, and breathe, and maybe you're a little bit more like me, where like you shoot, but not every day, not every week, and you get ready for a hunt, you go on a hunt and you shoot, and maybe you do a training a year, or you get out and shoot a little prairie dogs or whatever, but you have experience, you know how to run your equipment, you know your gear, but you don't shoot all the time. You do not want to dial your wind correction. That opens you up for so many opportunities to make mistakes that it is not for the non-professional. And I am not a professional. Like, I do not dial wind. The most effective, I shouldn't say correct, the most effective way for us to get a solution for long range is to dial the elevation and hold the wind. And a couple reasons for that. If you dial your elevation, you are able to use the horizontal bar to make sure that you're correct, and then you just adjust your wind left and right. If you hold wind, hold elevation, you're not anchored to anything, and you pick some points, and it's very easy to get mixed up on where you're at. Did I hold the right number? Did I scale it? It's just, there's a lot of opportunities to make mistakes. So if you dial the elevation, now we just eliminated one thing to worry about. Now we just use that horizontal crossbar. I like to hold for wind because it freaking changes. And if you dial, you're always reaching up there to twist something or to change something. And unfortunately for me, if I'm dialing, there's not a 50-50 chance I'm right and wrong. Like it's 65-75 that I'm making the wrong correction. It's like, do you dial left or right? And then you have to sit there and think about it. If you're holding for wind, it's very easy. You can visualize the wind. You can visualize what's going to happen to the bullet. It's going to drift over here. So I have to shift my whole frame of reference back over. And so in a split second, you can visualize what's going on and make the correct hold for the direction. So in the system of long-range hunting, dial elevation, hold wind. All right, so let's put that aside. There's a lot of casual approach to this where people shoot and they're like, man, I was shooting 800 yards. It's like, let's just hold 2 minutes and let's shoot. And then it's like, oh, that's about right. Let's hold 2 minutes. And so they get to this method of kind of short circuiting the system. And then, they're like, okay, it's 400 yards. It's like, well, let's just hold a minute. Let's try that. And so you shoot it. And then sooner or later, you're going to come across a scenario where it's like, I don't know, let's give it 2 minutes. Doesn't work. And we make a mistake and you miss or you wound an animal. And what I want to get everybody to do is realize there's only one thing that you're allowed to guess. Everything else, no guess is allowed. So here's what we need to do. We need to know what is the direction of the wind. We need to know how fast the wind is going. We need to know how far our target is. And we need to have a ballistic solution available to us. That's a app on your phone. It's a microcomputer in a rangefinder or a smart scope, but you have to have a calculation tool for wind. Maybe you have a chart that's detailed enough and specific enough that you actually have a chart of values, and that substitutes for the calculation. Rules of thumb, math that you have to do on the fly to get that number. It's not for us. It's not for long-range hunting. And you can say what you want, but for most of us, that is going to cost us sooner or later. And I've had enough experience with training people, thousands of people, and hunting hundreds and hundreds of animals and helping new people. I really, really feel strongly that what I'm telling you is fact. Like there's a lot of empirical evidence on that. Okay, so out of all those things, the last thing that we need is a precision tool to make our adjustment for the wind. And here's probably where some of the dialing comes from is somebody has a scope that doesn't have the right reticle, and you do not have the precision in the reticle, and so you're forced to dial. So you're handicapping yourself by not having the right reticle. If you have the right reticle where you have hash marks in a consistent pattern that allows you like a minute, or if you're a mill guy that mills, but let's say you have minute of angle marks, so every minute there's a mark. If you're a shooter and you are set up on a target and I'm your spotter and I tell you to hold, 2 minutes left, let's say we've got all the directions worked out, it's very, very easy for you to be precise. If I say, hey, hold 2.25 minutes left, you could do that. You just hold 2 minutes and shade a little bit. 2.5, it's doable. So you've got a resolution that's almost a quarter minute. We're talking a couple inches at 1,000 yards. So having the right reticle is absolutely a key element of this. One of the things that we changed, man, it's probably been 5 years ago, is I put a stop to selling second focal plane reticles. And I did it because of personal experience with myself shooting, or, with my kids as they were growing up, teaching them how to shoot and getting in hunting situations. I can actually picture a couple of really stupid misses in my head. My daughter was on a Harley. She was on a Antelope that was probably high 70s, 78, 79, 450 yards away, but we had a smoking big wind, probably 15-mile-an-hour wind. And we had walked our butts off to get there. It was cold. We had a little bit of snow, so you could see some horizontal snowflakes. And she held the wrong direction. I was on another one where we had a scope that we used to shoot Night Force and second focal plane in the NXS, dialed all the way up to 22 power. The subtension was minute of angle. We had our own reticle in there. But if you pulled that thing back and somebody was close enough to an animal that they pulled it back in magnification down to, 12, 13 power, so they could see more and find it and get on the animal, then they didn't turn it up. But when we told them how much wind to hold, they held that in marks, not in minutes. And you have to do this math. If it's at 1 minute at 22 power, you dial it down to 11. Now all of a sudden it's 2 minutes. But what if you're 13 or 14? Well, it's going to be a little less than 2 minutes. And that math and that memory and that ability doesn't exist when there's a 200-inch buck over there. Like, it's not there. We don't practice and shoot enough. We all have to make money and have jobs and families, and it's not what we do. Anyways, first focal plane reticle only. That's a requirement that we have on every gun that we're shooting here. We do a second focal plane Swarovski scope for dangerous game only. Other than that, it's first focal plane. That's caused a lot of heartache over the years. We have a lot of customers that like the ease and comfort and view of a second focal plane, like how it behaves, the simplicity of it. But it's going to cost you sooner or later, and we don't do it. If a guy wants to buy a gun from us, he can mount a scope up and do what he wants, but we won't use second focal plane. So you start with a system. You've got a ballistic solver that can calculate a wind solution based on what your range is and what an input of speed and direction is. You have a reticle that gives you a very, very precise way to hold a wind correction. So those two systems, those two pieces, you should have it. Like if you've got a Gunwerks rifle, you've got a Revic Accurascope on it. It's got a first focal plane reticle, and you've got a Revic BR4 rangefinder. Like, that's it. You've got those two things. Now, like any good first focal plane scope with good, marks left and right works. Doesn't work as good as something that I put together. Maybe not. I'm very, very fond of the way we design our first focal plane reticles. And there's a lot of rangefinders out there that have the ability to calculate ballistics. Some of them are a little clunkier than others in terms of how the wind goes in. All the guys that have kind of adopted our base wind, vector wind methodologies have a pretty good system there. So look for something like that in your rangefinder, or buy a Revic. That's another way to do it. So what's left? We need to know the speed and the direction. So a wind meter is great. Put it up there, measure the direction, speed. And I see a lot of guys doing this stuff where they hold the wind meter up and they're just getting that vector and they're trying to dial it in. And it's like, okay, it's this direction, and they'll capture it and they'll do this. And it gets really, really complex really fast. And for guys that have a lot of experience hunting, that kind of cumbersome solution methods can cost you opportunities. And it's frustrating for us that know how to just get in there and get it done, to watch somebody do that, not have the equipment management skills, not really have the right work streams put together or the right systems put together, and watch them just take too long and watch that opportunity disappear. It's very frustrating. So I think it's important that we have, kind of the right work streams put together for our skill sets and for the hunting type style and opportunities that we have. Not very many times have I been on a hunt where you have time to pull out a ballistic calculator and push buttons and scroll through here and navigate little menus and find the solution and then go to your scope and dial it and shoot. Like, a lot of the time it's push the button, dial it, shoot very fast. And it's pretty effective. Okay, so here's what I wanted to suggest. In base wind style, we don't care about the vector of the wind. The methods that we're going to use to estimate the wind speed are all going to give us the full value component of the wind. And that whole concept of vector components and full value, partial value, it's like, it's intense. It's actually one of my favorite parts to teach in our long range university courses, where, I can break out my inner engineering nerd and, break down a very complex topic into some very, very simple graphics and explanations. All right, so we're only interested in the crosswind component. That's the part that's really affecting our hunting distance shot solution. I'm going to use, as a shooter, I'm going to use a couple very simple ways to estimate what that crosswind component is. But let's make it even more basic. And let's literally take it to pure guess. All right, so I've got a brand new person, not experienced, shooting, reading the wind, etc. Knows how to pull the trigger, obviously, been around for a long time, but this long range stuff's kind of new. And I put him behind a spotting scope or have him look down his rifle scope and teach him how to see mirage, or open up his eyes to reading a little vegetation. In about 5 to 10 minutes, I can take anybody, any shooting instructor can take that person and show them how to guess, or determine, I should say, whether the wind is blowing predominantly from left to right or from right to left. So the first decision as a shooter or spotter is we have to decide, do we have a left wind or a right wind? Now, a little nomenclature sidebar there. If I have a left to right wind, I have a left wind. I think everybody gets that. And when I tell somebody to do a correction, I'm going to hold 2 minutes to the left, which means we're going to aim to the left of the target, and we're actually going to count to the right of the reticle. So that's something that needs practice and understood, so you don't make that mistake. The reticle that we just did has a quick reference for you of the wind direction. And so the RH2, if you look in there, it's got a wind indicator to the right. It's like, that means you need to hold on the right side, which is a left hold. Okay, so first focal plane reticle, shooter, learns to look at the mirage or vegetation and make a binary choice of a left wind or a right wind. And that can be taught in about 10 minutes. Done. Put it aside, we're done. Like, very rarely will you make a mistake on that piece. We have a calculator that calculates the solution perfectly, like in the rangefinder. You got a reticle that can hold within a 1/4 minute resolution in the scope. Doesn't matter what power it's on, doesn't matter what's going on. Like, if you hold 2, it's on 2, it's perfect. Everything else gets rendered down to the last decision, which is how fast is that crosswind component. And for a novice, like a total beginner, and myself included, I'm going to say, is it a 0 mile per hour wind? Is there any wind? If there's no wind, then it's 0. You just shoot. Is it a 10 mile an hour wind? It's like, that's a pretty big wind. If you pulled your wind meter out at all, you have a sense for what that is. Is it in that magnitude? Right? If it is, boom, you got a 10 mile an hour wind. Is it less than that, but not 0? Then it's a 5. And if it's a lot more than that, then it's time to maybe get a little closer, or get that wind meter out and kind of maybe go to that next advanced methodology. So here we've got the ability to say, is it 0, 5, 10, maybe 15, without potentially even breaking your wind meter out. You're just saying, wow, that's a big wind. So 0, light, medium, heavy, maybe, perhaps. All right. in the range finding binocular or the rangefinder, the monocular, the BR4, when you program your profile, so you got your app out, right, and you build an app for your cartridge, one of the parameters that you can program into that profile is your base wind speed. And so guess what speed I'm picking? I'm going to pick 5. So if I've got a 0, I hold nothing. If I got a 5, it's calculated for me right there. If I've got a 10, I just hold 2 times the value. So I've got a shot, it's 700 yards. I push the button on the rangefinder. It tells me to dial to 720 yards, so I dial 720. And it also tells me that for a base wind of 5, I need to hold 1.5 MOA. And so I've got that data, and I'm looking down range, and I'm like, that's a left to right wind. Okay, perfect. That means I'm going to have to hold to the left, which will be counting right on the reticle. So when I go to that last step of the speed, I'm gonna assess it. I'm gonna say, you know what? That's a 5 mile an hour wind. It's not 10, and it's not 0. So I'm gonna shoot for a 5. So I hold 1.5, take the shot. So we can do a little like rough order of magnitude sensitivity analysis just based on that data. I think that's pretty close to what like a 600 BC, 3,000 feet per second cartridge would do, is something like that, 1.5 minutes at 700 yards for a 5 mile an hour wind. If you're 10, then you would be 3. So you'd be 3 minutes of angle. So let's say it was a 9 or 8 or 9 mile an hour wind. Like it's almost 10, but I make the mistake and I say it was 5, and so I hold for 5. That's 1.5. Okay, so that means I missed by something like a minute, maybe 1.5 minutes in my hold. So if I missed by a minute, that's about 7 inches, 1.5 minutes, 10 inches. So worst case scenario, I missed by the whole 5 mile an hour wind. So that's 10 inches. If I'm shooting at a deer and I've got my aim point like that upper third, and I'm on the shoulder right behind it, I wait for a broadside shot, heads up, everything's there. I have 1.5 minutes plus or minus. So if you think about your sensitivity, right? Your sensitivity here is to your ability to guess the speed. If you've got a 600 BC, 3,000 foot per second cartridge, like your sensitivity will allow you to be off by 5 miles per hour on your wind guess at 700 yards and still be deadly. So process that for a second. Think about what that means. So I don't think we're ever going to quite miss by a full 5. So I think this base wind system, right, this idea of don't screw up the direction, it's binary, don't screw it up, and guess your crosswind speed within 5. It's a 0, 5, 10. You are going to be half mile capable with minimal practice, with minimal refresher, enough that you can do it, that you're comfortable with it, but you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be able to say that is 1.7, miles per hour from a, 3 o'clock or from a 1 o'clock. Like you don't have to do that. Just is it 0, 5, 10? It's very straightforward. That system, I believe, is 100% the perfect long-range hunting program. It's very simple to execute. The worst case scenario is you have to do 2 times or 3 times. That's the most math that I think I can stand to do when I'm hunting. All right, that's our base wind system. It's something that we really try to drill into people that attend our long range university in our level 1 course. You get into that level 2 course, we're going to try to introduce vector wind, and that's a whole nother topic. And maybe I need to try to come up with a little bit of a sketchboard or something here so I can do some doodling while I'm chatting on this. Again, initially, this is one of those things where it's like you might have to write out the process, visualize it, make sure you have the right equipment, and then you get to the range and you practice it. It's very easy to go to the range and shoot, get yourself onto steel, shoot some more, and it's fun. practicing a single shot, setting up from scratch, range, dial, wind, everything, shot, evaluate performance, find another setup, do it again. Those have a lot more efficacy for, creating more skill sets that allow us to shoot farther and farther with higher hit probabilities. So I'll challenge you guys to make sure that you are very deliberate about your wind system. Consider adopting the Gunwerks base wind system of wind correction for your long-range hunting setup. And I think that you will make big strides and big progress. Even if you think you're an expert, having that system in your back pocket for fast, rapid acquisition is very significant. I can tell you from experience. So I'll come up with some more pilot stories for the next one, but for now, that's the Gunwerks base wind system.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram or send us an email to podcast@gunwerks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunwerks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.